Good evening, everyone. Today we have the second meeting of our little health series. And today we have Dr. Belcher here, who's an assistant teaching professor at the University of Missouri and also a retired public school teacher and administrator. And he's talking to us about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on schools, on teachers, on teacher job certifications, and how every teacher had to adjust to all of a sudden do everything online. Kind of the same problem we had here in Germany, but today we're looking at it from an American perspective. So let's get started.
Okay. Well, thank you. And please interrupt and ask questions. I would like this to be more of a conversation than a presentation, but I'll give you a brief overview of who I am, a brief overview of how the schools were organized in Missouri and the United States politically and organizationally, and then I'll tell you the story about what occurred in the schools in the Midwest. But I'm Chris Belcher. I started in the education profession 1982 as a chemistry and biology teacher at the high school level. I did that for 6 years. And in the United States, you can get certified to be a principal, and I did that. And I became an assistant principal at a high school, a very large high school in suburban Kansas City, and did that for quite some time. And then I got certified to be a superintendent and moved to a district level administrative role where I dealt mainly with curriculum. And then I moved through various ranks, but I did personnel. But the last 14 years of my career, I was a superintendent. And that basically means I was in charge of a school district. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when I retired, this may be different where you're at. We have a public school retirement system that's different from our national retirement system. And so after 30 years of being in the public school system, I could retire from that system and draw a pension and then go do other work. So it's a long story how that happened, but it's a good deal for educators. And so when I retired, I went to work for the University of Missouri, basically teaching the program that certifies principals and superintendents in our state. And so I've been doing that for the last 8 years. In addition to that, I do some national consulting with high schools across our nation on ways for them to get more diverse students, specifically students of color and low income status, into advanced placement programs, which is a rigorous model. It's much like international baccalaureate. You may be used to IB more than AP, but I travel around the nation talking to schools and teachers on strategies to get the underrepresented kids into those programs. So that's my general background. I've been over to your place several times with Bruno, once with a group of faculty from the University of Missouri. It was a great visit to the Institute, and we got to go to the European Union and speak to experts. It was just absolutely wonderful. And at the time, I made connections and came back the next summer and visited 5 or 6 high schools in the Saarland area and had a reciprocal visit set up for a certain school to come to my schools in Columbia, but then COVID hit. So we literally, they shut down the travel the week before they were supposed to come out and spend a couple weeks in the high schools in my district. The district I retired from, by the way, is a school district of about 25,000 students. We have 3 large high schools, 6 middle schools, and about 22 elementary schools. And that's what we call a school district. In Missouri, even though we're a state of about 6,000 people, historically in the United States, school districts have been very small and broken up into the states, and the states break up into school districts. There's very little federal oversight of public schools. It's a much more state function than what you'd be used to in Germany. And to just let you know, in Missouri, for example, even though we have maybe 1 million total students in kindergarten through their senior year, we have 519 school districts. And each school district has 7 board members that are elected, and they serve 3-year terms. And so the politics that happen in public schools in Missouri is the state sets the broad agenda. And from that, the school districts then interpret that agenda and implement the programs. And the funding they get is some of it comes from the state, but most of it comes from the local community and a property tax. And I'm giving you this background because it plays into this COVID thing very significantly. So what has happened in Missouri, and in most states, by the way, function the same way. It's a very independent-based system, that there's a lot of governance that's determined at the local level by elected board members. You have to follow state guidelines, but there's a lot of leeway in there how to interpret and make those rules. That creates lots of problems from a broader perspective. For example, if you're a student in a certain school district in Missouri, you might have about $7,000 in funding following you per year. You could be at another district that's more affluent, and it might be $15,000 to $16,000 of funding follows a student per year. So one of the things we really struggle with in Missouri and in the United States in general is a financial inequity in the school systems, because it embraces the independence of the local communities over the governance at the state level. And so a school district, if they want to have more money per student, they can go to the voters, and the voters will approve a property tax increase that puts more money into the school system for them to hire teachers and do all the things that schools do. And if you're in, let's say, a rural district that has a much more conservative viewpoint and maybe less property wealth, and they voted down, the state tries to give them a little more to make up for the difference, but it never works out the way it's supposed to. And the dynamics there have been going on. There's lawsuits that are filed about every 10 years by the poorest school districts saying kids shouldn't be punished because of where they live, by their access to quality education. There's a lawsuit going on in Colorado right now. Every state's struggling with this. Some states have become more progressive in that they have the money come to the state level and they distribute it per school, but that creates a lot of political backlash as well. So in Missouri, I want you to understand we're in a very inequitable system of funding per school district. And the majority of our school districts are small rural districts that have less property wealth than the urban and suburban districts. And your tax dollar, or the funding for the school, is often based on that local property wealth. And so we'll see that when I talk about the COVID, how there was a very disparate impact on how students and teachers were affected based on the property wealth of the communities and the technologies the community had. And that's vital to understand. When I was over and visiting your schools, and I've been visiting Swedish schools for a long time. Long time ago, I got connected with some educators there and have interacted with their schools. And the more federalist model, where the money is distributed from the state or from the nation through an educational ministry, gets away from a lot of that inequity in funding that we see in the United States. Now, when you bring that up in the United States, you have the right-leaning conservatives that want to claim you for being a socialist, which in some cases in the United States, people consider that a bad word. You know, I mean, you know how we are, how polarized we are in the United States. It doesn't, you just have to watch the news for 10 minutes to understand that there's the progressive versus this really conservative movement. It's almost split down the middle. And so getting to move to a more equitable model of funding is really difficult in the current political environment that we're in. Because remember, every school is governed by 7 board members that are elected. And they will oftentimes run on an election platform of don't have the state manage our money, we want local control. And then it gets into the curriculum debates coming up about some more conservative school boards are wanting to ban certain books and materials. And they can, because they're a local board, And unless they violate some constitutional, federal or state constitutional position, they can make these decisions. And same with funding. They can determine how they want to seek funding and how they use funding within a parameters. So when COVID hit, like everyone, trying to figure out how we can protect students and teachers. So overnight, schools were told we're going to go virtual. And the problem is, in my school district, we're in a university town. We're well funded compared to a lot of the small rural schools around us. We had already gone to a one-to-one technology model, which every student had a laptop, and teachers had already moved to using curriculum management tools such as Canvas or Blackboard or whatever. So they were more capable to do it, but even then, they had used it as a support structure, not as an instructional tool. And so they were told overnight, you're just going to teach everything on, I think it's Schoolology is what Columbia Public Schools used. And so they raced to do this. Students had laptops, but even those laptops had to have some software loaded on them to allow them to do things from home. Some kids didn't have internet access, so the school district had to find hotspots to get to students. It was much like it was everywhere, very chaotic as we tried to deliver the instructional program totally virtual, when many teachers weren't prepared technologically and they weren't prepared pedagogically. They really hadn't developed the online teaching tools and strategies that are necessary to make instruction engaging in a Zoom or an online format. So I tell you that's going on in Columbia. I'm retired from there, but I still live in the community and still do a lot of consulting with the district. So I'm in the schools a lot. Teachers were at their wits' end. Some were being told you're going to take more students because of this. Special education teachers really struggled because they had individual educational plans for every student that they had to try to manage. The district struggled to tell what the clear message was. And then when they got the students signed up, lots of students wouldn't log on. And so the teacher didn't know what their role was to try to get the student to actually attend. And so we went through that normal process that everyone else did. If you go to the school districts in Missouri that had less funding, it was even more problematic because they had to figure out ways to buy laptops and to give students access to the internet to where they could actually even participate in virtual education. And in our lower income communities, the resources available to those families are less, and the supervisional environment for those kids are often less because you have families sometimes that are working 2 and 3 jobs and there's less adult supervision at home. It was a disaster in the communities like that. And then we had some communities that were, again, 7 elected board members said, we're not going to shut down school. And so they kept going face to face, thinking it was a good idea, but then they just kept having this wave and wave of COVID outbreak going through the schools where they tried to shut down a classroom, thinking they could do it piece by piece, but then it would go to multiple classrooms. So they'd shut down for a week or 2, and then they try to come back. So they had the off and on model that was really hard for instructional purposes, was really hard for families to figure out how they're going to manage their students when they're not in school, because another dire issue that was pointed out as a flaw in the American model is we have so little access to before and after school daycare or childcare for working parents. So again, the schools that have wealth would often have programs that a parent could pay a nominal fee for their younger children to stay at school until 5 o'clock, but your lower income communities did not have that. And then we put the kids at home in the low income communities where the parents could not have the ability to stay home and supervise their students. compared with the more affluent communities that had ways to do that, the inequity just blossomed in the state of Missouri in what students were getting instructionally when COVID hit. So that's the instructional part. It got better after that first winter. We had the summer break. We regrouped and it got a little bit better, but still we found about 20% of the students just didn't attend when they went back virtual in the fall. That, again, it's that supervision issue. If you don't have parents at home that are helping to manage that, the kids just would not show up, or they'd log on and hit their video and audio mute button and not really engage. And then when some schools, again, 7 board members, every district was making different decisions, they said you have a choice. Once the things got a little better, you can come back to school and wear a mask, or you can stay home and learn virtual. And that may sound okay, but then they told the teachers, you're responsible for both groups. You have to be able to teach the virtual group as well as those face-to-face. So they tried to do what we're doing now, or Yaka baby is learning from home, but I've got some other kids in front of me and we're trying to put the cameras around so that it can be done. That didn't work very well. The hybrid or the shared model didn't work very well. And most of that was caused, again, from this masking model. Became so political here in the United States. It was absolutely crazy. I don't think a lot of your schools in more affluent areas saw that it would be a problem, but in the more conservative school districts, the masking became almost a political ideology, that you don't have the right to tell people to wear that. There was the conspiracy theory that COVID was made up. It really wasn't that dangerous. And so some schools and their board members bought into that. Teachers were, I'd say, not split, but most teachers felt like wearing a mask was good and was safe for them. Other teachers didn't think that masks were pointed. So what happened during COVID with this masking model and the vaccination, as they started to come out, was that it intensified the political ideologies that were already present in our schools and in our country. And so the vaccine and mask mandates became a rally cry for the right-leaning conservatives, that was government overreach and taking away rights of students and teachers and parents. And on the progressive left side, it was considered to be reasonable public health, that wearing a mask shouldn't be seen as a constitutional right or infringing upon anyone's issue. It was simply a good science. And that when the vaccinations came out, that we started to encourage people to get vaccines, but no governor and the politicians have virtually taken their hands off of vaccine mandates for public schools because of this rift politically, which is really interesting because right now in our state, in our nation, kids are required to have 7 or 8 vaccinations like they've had for 20 years, just like you guys, the measles, mumps, rubella, the polio. We've been doing that for 50, 60 years, and no one's really ever made it a political issue, where somehow COVID, because of the misinformation and the political ideology attached to it, has made schools just even backing away from saying kids will be required to have the COVID vaccine, to schools encouraging. And even when a school encourages it, that sometimes will cause a public uproar from the right, and they will seek to get board members removed and those kind of things. And then you add to that is that political ideology started to form with something that wasn't political. We now see more of that occurring, where the political right wants to ban any kind of critical race theory discussion with kids. You may have seen in Florida, the governor and put in place a no, you can't say gay rule in the Florida schools, that you can't have discussions with kids about sexual orientation. You see schools and political groups that are wanting to ban certain books that have an agenda they think is too liberal for the kids, and that's just intensified that debate. Now, I tell you that whole political story, and I'm trying not to put my own political spin on there. But what this has caused to happen based on the research is 2 years ago, if you ask teachers, were they planning to leave the profession in the next 2 or 3 years, about 16% said yes. It's now 25% and climbing. And in short, 25% of the nation's teachers say they're strongly considering another option to teaching. That is an impact of COVID and its connection to political ideology. The terrible things happen to mask mandates. My replacement when I retired became superintendent. He had to have police presence at his home because people in the community were threatening him because he and the board were supporting a mask mandate based on the guidance of the medical community in Boone County and the state. In other words, they were just following what the medical science was from those officials that are elected and are not elected, but run our state and county agencies on public health. And this was not uncommon that schools that were taking a more science-based approach to masking and school attendance were getting threats, and through email, board meetings, parents would show up and become threatening, or sometimes a security officers would have to remove those people from board meetings. And I think that's impacted the teachers too, because they would get those same kind of comments from parents and community, even though they weren't the ones making the decisions. And then you add to that, making that political movement to go into other areas. I think teachers, or those seeking to look into becoming teachers, are seeing it as a politicized environment that doesn't appeal to them as much as what maybe teaching looked like 10 years ago. And so we also notice there's been a lower application of those applying to our teacher preparation institutions. We don't know if that's endemic yet. It's down, but it could be a factor of simply the COVID environment where people maybe are not going to university for a semester because they have to take care of things, or we don't know if it's based on a broader cultural context, or it's just that education is becoming less appealing because of these political rifts in the pay. We know that teacher turnover in our lower income area schools has accelerated. And we now have probably the most serious teacher shortage that I've ever seen in public schools. I talk with my colleagues around me and they'll say, hey, we've got 3 or 4 job openings, say for a language arts position, and no one's applied. It's not that the pool has shrunk in some school districts, that the pool doesn't exist in some school districts. And so there's been, and then with inflation going there, you're starting to see a lot of schools try to raise teacher salaries because they're trying to compete for teachers. And what's going to happen in this inequitable environment in Missouri is the schools that have more wealth will start to accelerate their pay scale. And the schools that don't have that wealth are going to struggle to find teachers to fill their classrooms. And this was done already when we were having trouble finding science teachers, foreign language teachers, and special education teachers had already been at a historic low in environment. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see small school districts have to join a consortium of schools that have online course options, which is already allowed in Missouri, that a school that doesn't want to teach, say, advanced biology, but a student can sign up for it in an online format, and the school district has to pay for it according to Missouri law now. So you're seeing those kind of things are going to happen to try to deal with those lack of being able to hire specialized teachers in the environment. That also creates this cultural issue in our schools to where teachers feel like they're not getting the support they used to get. They feel like with hopefully, coming back in the fall, that there's going to be a more normal classroom environment, but I think there's still anxiety. We already see our president currently has the new strain of COVID B5. So, and we know that that's going to disrupt a lot of the classrooms, because when kids get it, you have to have a quarantine. Those kids go home, their teachers are going to be told, well, you supply for that instruction online or virtual, while the kids that don't have it are going to come to these other classrooms. We see that happening. I've got a few notes here. I want to make sure I hit some of the things. And the funding that schools do get from a state level are often based heavily on student attendance. Remember, in Missouri, about 60% of the money for funding comes from local tax base, and the other 30 to 40% comes from state mainly, with a small percent federal. Most schools in Missouri receive less than 7% of their funding from the federal government. So in Missouri, funding for schools is almost virtually all state and local. So if you have kids that quit attending because their parents have concerns about health and safety, you don't get funded for that student from the state level. So your state portion of funding drops dramatically. So what the state has done, they took the money that the federal government pumped out to support COVID issues. They've tried to raise their salaries and do some things with that one-time money, but that money runs out pretty soon, and then schools are going to be back to where does that money come from? Because the only way we can get more funds into schools in Missouri is through tax increases, and all those have to come from the voters. The voters have to approve that. So we're going to see a reckoning when the federal money runs out on how schools are going to deal with that. Now, I talked about teachers, but I'll tell you the other positions that are out there are hard to fill as well. Almost every community I drive through, there's a sign that says bus drivers wanted. It's becoming very hard for schools to find qualified bus drivers for student transportation. We have clerical and food service workers that are becoming more difficult to find. And as we see in this strange economy that the United States is in, which is this high inflation economy, but a really low unemployment. And so companies that can pass their cost on to a consumer and raise the price and hire workers at a higher wage because of the limited market are starting to draw people away from the educational employment area, because we can't do that. There's no way a school in short term can raise money to up salaries. You work within the budget that you're allotted from the taxpayers. So that's making finding bus drivers and food service workers and paraprofessionals, as we call them, which are non-certified people that help in the classroom, is becoming difficult. And I've talked with several focus groups of teachers recently, and they are starting to more and more tell me that they could take a job outside of teaching at a retail environment or an insurance company and make considerably more than they do teaching, because the low unemployment is really driving up wages for workers, but not as much for teachers, because the system simply doesn't have the ability to make that quick time adjustment based on market forces, because our money comes from a tax base and voter approved environment. So what of that sounds like what's going on in Germany, and what is different, and what would you like me to respond to? That's the general issue. I've been blabbing on here for 30 minutes, so I want to back away and see what I've confused you with and what you'd like to talk about more. Jacob says, can you give an estimate of the average wage for a teacher at a public high school? Absolutely, Jacob, I can. In Missouri, the average salary for a public high school teacher is going to be around $48,000 to $50,000 US a year. And if you move towards the East Coast and the West Coast have a higher cost of living. That's going to go up by about $10,000. Missouri is always in the middle because we're in a lower cost of living state. So in Missouri, it's going to be 50 to 55,000, around that range. On the East and the West Coast, it's going to be $55,000 to $65,000 per year. And I'll let you know in Missouri, and well, in most states, that is a contract length for usually 190 to 192 days. As you know, in the United States, we have a long summer break, and teachers either go back to school to advance their education because their pay rises as they get advanced degrees, or a school district can choose to hold a summer school session, and teachers are paid on a different scale for summer school. So a teacher could go back and teach summer school and make another $5,000 to $7,000 if they wanted to do summer school. Did that answer your question, Jacob?
I can also speak to you. It did answer my question. Thank you very much. I would have another question along with that. For the higher education, what is the wage that you can aim at? For example, in Germany, we study 2 subjects already, and then we usually equipped to teach the whole secondary school system from like grade 5 to, what is it, 12 or something. So is there a difference to, I know that the education in the US is way shorter for teachers.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got the complete question. Is about how are you certified to teach and at what level?
No, well, yeah, and what is the chances, or how much can you up the wage when you have the higher education, when you can teach more than one subject and more than one age group?
Okay, that's a great question, because once again, we get into this equity issue. In most states, the state legislature has said that teachers are paid on the same salary schedule per district. So a district sets a salary schedule, and in most school districts in the nation, but certainly in Missouri, if you teach first grade or if you teach high school physics, you're on the same salary schedule. And if you have certified to teach physics, biology, and chemistry, you still are on the same salary schedule. If you teach special education, you're on the same salary schedule. So there's no ability for schools to differentiate pay based on market needs, which creates a challenge. The contract length is the same. We run the same school schedule for kindergarten through our 12th grade system. Summer school is the optional issue, and they're much more popular than elementary level because you're not required to do summer school. It's an option for parents. And so elementary teachers will be more likely be able to have that offered to them as an employment option. And then the other thing that is a great debate here in many states is that most schools have it, if you get a master's degree in education, you get a certain pay raise. And if you get some education above that, you get a more pay. So it's based on educational advancement. The argument is there's a limited research that shows that a master's degree in education really makes you a more effective teacher than those that don't have a master's degree in education. That experience and development in your own district, which offers lots of training and opportunities at various district by district. So we're seeing some schools go away from that pay increase based on education to based on so many hours of training in the local district as a way to have better control of what they want the teachers to gain skills in and reward them with pay increases as they have more skill and experience in the district. Now, the problem is, remember, I told you there are 519 school districts in the little state of Missouri. If I got that advancement here in Columbia because I did all this professional development, and I wanted to go teach in St. Louis, a St. Louis school district may not give me any credit for that on my salary schedule. And they bring me in on their schedule, which maybe wouldn't be as high as someone that had gotten a master's degree, because different districts are setting different stipulations for that salary advancement. With that said, the one thing that Missouri does well is if you teach from one school district to another in Missouri, just like in Germany, you're still on the pension system. You don't lose that if you move around the schools in Missouri, but you lose it if you move state to state. And so we call it the golden handcuffs. Most states have a retirement system that after 20 years, if you were moved to another state and they don't have any kind of reciprocity on that, you lose the benefit of a really strong retirement system. And so those retirement systems have been made as a way to keep people in the state that they're in. And then a lot of people may retire once they're able, and they can move to another state and teach there after the fact. So we call that double dipping here. I'm doing it now. I retired in public education, but I'm paid by the university system now. And I'm not penalized financially for doing that in two systems. That was a long answer, Jacob. I'm sorry if that was more than you wanted.
No, very interesting points. Thank you very much. So,
but when I was in Germany, I had the conversation with all these teachers, and one thing I said is, one, if we had a state salary system like you have as a federal salary system generally in Germany, it would change the game in Missouri completely, because you wouldn't see people moving jobs as frequently to go get higher wage jobs in another district that may be 10 miles away. And that happens a lot. The more proficient teachers, they're wanted. So they can, every so often, someone tries to steal them away from another district and to pay them more. And so you see a lot of that happening. Whereas from my experience in Germany in the past, is that teacher selection is done at a national level, and how the principals told me they would like to have more input on who they hire, whereas in the state of Missouri, the principal and the team make the decision on who they hire. But the issue is, there's just in my little area of Missouri, there's 6 or 7 school districts, and the school district like Columbia that have more money are constantly taking these teachers from the small schools that are proven to be good teachers and paying them sometimes $5,000 and $6,000 more a year just to come to our school and teach the same subjects to kids because we can. So it's almost a capitalist model in an educational system that doesn't function under capitalistic principles, because we're regulated on the money we get in a more social system type of model. So that is ironic. The other thing that I told them in Germany, if I were, as a superintendent, to have proposed that we were going to require that all students have to take a world religions course as a requirement for graduation, I'd probably have been fired. The ideology and the political polarity is so much here that talking about race, religion, and politics in the system has teachers running scared, because it's, again, with every school district having 7 elected board members, it's just become a dynamic that, in the past, our jobs weren't nearly political. If a kid wanted to take the world religion, we have those courses, but they're elective. Whereas many people on the progressive side think we need to do a better job at having kids learn and understand the diversity of religions, what they believe, and like most of Europe does, as just part of their national curriculum model. We don't have nationalized curriculum. Every school district has the ability to set the curriculum they want. Now they're tested. We have state testing, so that testing controls that you want to score well on the state test, but it's all over the place in the schools. So the good part about Missouri schools is there's so many schools trying different things that we have little labs, little incubators of ideas. And once a school district does something that really works, other school districts go there and visit and we'll try to do that same program. Like with COVID, if some school was nailing it on how they were managing the online learning environment, other school districts would collaborate with that school, figure out what they were doing, and try to bring it back. Whereas a more nationalized model, if everyone's doing something through a general framework, you don't have as much opportunity for experimentation. That's my guess. I don't know. But of course, the problem is that kids change schools and the curriculum is different at each school they go to. I mean, there's some general similarities because schools tend to share and do the same things. But we don't have nationalized curriculum, period. And when it was supported through the Common Core model, again, political ideology said that was socialism, and states and schools should have the right to choose their own curriculum, and pretty soon that was gone. So that faction in the United States that really wants to have total independent governance of their school systems is really loud, and that's just the system we're going to have. It's just not going to change. And so, unfortunately, kids in Missouri, depending on where they live, is going to determine the quality of their education and the resources that follow them. Whereas in Germany, that's much less likely because of a federalist system of management of schools. And again, I'm making some assumptions. I've been over there a couple of times. I am not an expert on German schooling models, so just more than I was 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And I hope to come back here soon. I've got money in my account to travel as soon as I can get back in a safe way and start to visit some more schools.
Yeah, I think we do have some of the same problems, but it's not due to the financial abilities of the schools, but just the parents. Like in certain areas, the school might have the same amount of money available per pupil, but the parents or the families do not have as much. Mm-hmm. So we also had areas where the kids did not have a laptop to start, going to school via Zoom or something. Or they had one laptop but 5 kids. So obviously that didn't work out well. So we did have some of those problems, but, because of different reasons maybe. But it ended up being the same problem anyway.
Yeah. The other thing we noticed, and I'm sure you have the same thing with those kids that maybe are immigrants or non-native speakers or come from low-income areas, they're less likely to have adequate parental supervision at certain times of the day because of the types of jobs and requirements of those jobs that their parents have. And so we saw that kids that came from more resourced homes were more likely to be online on time and to complete their work than those kids that didn't have that same structure. And that was really frustrating for teachers because they have no control over that. And you're trying everything you can to help that student have the same access. But when you don't have that physical interaction with that kid every day, you really start to lose those abilities to provide extra or to have more conversations with parents because the communication is not the same. I think most of our teachers would tell you, and probably most of your teachers would share as well, that learning is a social emotional experience. We tend to learn in groups. We tend to learn from peers. We tend to learn through activities. And this going online so suddenly challenged that whole model and that whole belief system that teachers have been functioning on. And I think then when they try to do a Zoom class or something like that, and they didn't get participation, they would click off that class and just feel like they were not successful. They would be critical of themselves. They would be disappointed. And I think you see all that in the research now showing that they're just considering maybe this isn't for me because of those issues. And then when you talk to parents, those poor parents that don't have finances to have supervision or opportunities for their kids when they're at work are saying, what am I supposed to do? You need to have school. I don't care what the risks are. I can't do my job if my kid's not able to come to school because we don't have those opportunities. So it's creating a lot of that kind of angst and sometimes guilt. I think parents feel guilty, teachers feel guilty that they weren't able to get the kids engaged the way they wanted. And when I talk to teachers now, there's optimism that maybe we're through this and this fall is going to get more back to normal. And maybe we've gained some experiences. So if a student's homesick, now we have our online system so good that the kid doesn't miss much, that there's ways that they can learn when they're not in school because of illness or other issues that maybe before we didn't take full advantage of. There's also consortium starting up. For example, if I wanted to teach advanced placement chemistry in a school district, I could probably do it in the district I'm in because we pay well and we're a big system. But a lot of schools just don't have the teacher that has the certification or the background to teach that course. So we're seeing a lot more online collaboratives to where that advanced course will be taught virtually so that no matter where you live, you can tap in and do it. It's still not going to be as good as face-to-face, in my opinion. There are people that tell me that's our own biases are getting away that we think that face-to-face is naturally better. But with chemistry, I like to think, but the virtual online labs and so forth. So we're seeing that evolve, which is a good thing. But it's still terribly inequitable from school district to school district in our nation and in our states. I don't know in Germany if you're struggling in finding certain teachers, and if the Ministry of Education or that system has a way to intervene and correct for that quicker than we do. But that seems to be our problem, and it's certainly science, math, special education, and foreign languages.
Yeah. Well, I think the universities have a way to kind of steer that in the right direction by just admitting more future teachers to certain, classes. So
Yes.
if we know we're gonna need math teachers in 3 years, there are gonna be a whole lot of places for math teachers and not that many for English teachers.
Yeah.
So there is a way to kind of make that move a bit more smooth, but it doesn't necessarily always work, obviously, because you can study in Munich and still later on teach here, or the other way around.
Yeah, that system is much more direct than ours. Ours is totally free market. That occasionally when there's a great shortage, the federal government may step in and provide grants and so forth. And as you know, in the United States, getting access to higher education is another terribly inequitable experience. Whereas where you're at, if you qualify, you can go to university and make your way in for limited financial cost. It doesn't work that way in the United States, and there's grants and scholarships and those kind of things, but they're much lower than they used to be. And we find that kids choose their pathway, and education doesn't pay as well as other pathways. And so we do all sorts of marketing campaigns to get kids into education in special areas, but we don't do it very well.
Yeah, Jakob.
Yeah, I can join in on that because I think the latest numbers of future teachers that are lacking in Germany are ranging between 30,000 and 120,000 even. Differences in between how they do the math, but it's at least more than 30,000 missing in the upcoming years. I think for the Saarland it's like 1,000. For Berlin it's like 9,000, and it's the same subjects as you already said, Chris. It's the sciences and languages. And yeah, in Germany you're basically free to study whatever you like. I don't know how common it is in America for students or educated people to become a teacher after studying a certain subject, but not to become a teacher especially. So you just studied math and you become a math teacher and a physics teacher, because you decided to do that afterwards. In Germany, you can study to become a teacher, or you can just study math and then afterwards just do some didactic classes and then join a school. This is what we do a lot now to try to fill that gap.
And we're seeing that become more common, is that we call it alternative pathways, that to try to tap into people that have the background and get them into education with less bureaucratic hoops to jump through.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's getting better. Matter of fact, Florida just announced this week that if you're a veteran of the military, you can teach in Florida schools without a teaching certificate. And that's created a debate there, that are they really qualified just because they've had that background? What kind of training would be the minimum that you need on understanding classroom management and curriculum development and grading and assessments and those kind of things? So I think we're seeing that happen. We're seeing some states simply say, if you're in your final year of education, you can come and teach, and we'll pay you as a full-time teacher and work with the university to get you to have that degree finished. And those types of things are going to increase as we struggle to find teachers. And of course, we have assessment. Teachers have to pass certain tests to become a teacher. So there's debate around, is that too rigid? Is it scaring people away? Is it truly a measure of how effective they'd be as a teacher? And because right now that pathway does limit the number of people that can come into that field. And the other thing we do, and I don't know if Germany's as bad, we have so many narrow certifications, that in the high school you can be social studies, you have to be certified for English, business education, journalism, and it just becomes really impossible to get all the certification you need, especially if you're a small school. Maybe you only need that course taught, in one section a semester, and to find someone with that certification. And the state has started to loosen up on that to say, well, if you're a certified teacher, you can still teach what we call out of certification area courses. And right now, though, if I were in a school district and say I'm certified as a chemistry or biology teacher, if I were to teach English and I'm not certified there, the state would not send you the money to support that teacher because they're not certified in that area. So there's a lot of that debate going on as well.
Schools in Germany have a workaround with that. You usually have your two subjects, and then you have subjects that go together with it. For example, in Berlin, if you do history, you also have to do politics, which makes sense somehow because it's close to each other. But then you can also name subjects that you have an inclination for, kind of. So let's say you studied English, but you were also very good in French, and you would say, okay, I feel capable of teaching French as well. But then it's the question that you already mentioned: are you allowed, or would you be going to be allowed to take well, not SATs, but what is it, the A levels or something, right? Or an oral exam? Usually, you would have to have the proper education for that. But at least on a lower level, and since we teach from class 5 to 12 or 13, you can still do 5 to 10 and teach those subjects, and really help out schools, especially if, like you said, if the schools are small and you don't need 3 teachers to do the same subject, but maybe you need half a or just one class taught by someone else as well, right?
And we have at the secondary level where we have all these certifications. The elementary, you're an elementary teacher, that's it. You teach all that. But the secondary level, just like yours, Jacob, we split it up. But you can now just go back and take the state test. Say I'm a physics teacher, but I want to teach math. I can go back and take the math test, and if I pass that, they'll certify me in math. And schools will encourage people to do that, and will pay for their assessment with that. And other times, teachers don't want to do it because they don't want to have more certification areas, because they like teaching what they teach, and they know if they increase their certifications that they may be put in classes that are hard to fill and not really classes that they want to teach. So that's just that political back and forth that occurs in any system.
Are those tests manageable? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, you say, are the tests reasonable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had colleagues that, it's an adjacent field. They tend to be able to be successful on it. Certainly, I'd say if you were trained as a language arts and you did the math, you may struggle with that. But and there are prep programs, and you can pay for a practice test. So it's been successful in adjacent areas, much like you said, but you don't see people doing really broad cross categories with that.
Of course.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would want me teaching language arts or history. I'm pretty good at science, but I don't think I could. I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm not sure if it's based on what the discipline says is the correct viewpoint and understanding.
Okay, do we have any more questions? More questions?
Hey, Annika, I'm going to put up my email address, or will you send that to people?
Yeah, you can put it in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, in case anyone wants to contact me. Make sure it's correct. Yeah, that's my email address. Feel free to contact me. Oh, I'm sorry, it's edu. I do not make a mistake. Let me do it again.
Why you typed that in? You said you were looking to come back to Germany. You had connections within the Saarland, obviously. Have you been anywhere else? And what would your aim be if you come back and further some connections?
Oh, great. I have connections with Bruno. The
Obviously.
DAI, and I was in Saarland, and he had me lined up to do 5 high schools. One was a private school, one was a French, German.
Yeah, das Deutsch-Französische Gymnasium.
Yeah, so I saw a variety of them. I really enjoyed it, but I tend to just like to come. I don't come with a research agenda. I just want to interact with teachers and students. What I want to do is feel what the culture and the climate is like and how things are learning. And I bring it back and I incorporate what I teach on leadership to try to challenge my students. They see things the American way, and we need to be learning broader from our peers in other countries on the way they're managing instruction and assessment and those kind of things. So it really helps me from my standpoint. So all I need is a letter inviting me to come and spend 2 or 3 days, whatever, in a school. And what I do is if the university asks me to do some extra work, and they often say we can pay you this extra stipend, I just say I don't want the stipend. I want you to put it in my travel account. And I learned that from my friend in Sweden. That's how he always came over to the United States. So I figured that one out. So I have money that's been sitting in there since COVID to come back somewhere. And I was looking at Sweden, or I really liked Germany. I had not been in Germany until I went several years back, and was so impressed with the Saarland area and its connection to the history of France and back and forth between 2 nations. I just was so cool. I thought that was impressive. So I like that, but I'm open to find new friends and come and just explore. And I usually like to stay a week in an area, and I'm open to a full week in a school or to visit several schools. But I have to find, it has to be a school that's just comfortable with having me come in and engage that way. I love teachers. I love schools. I love how things are run. It's just a great environment to be in. And I create these partnerships that I share with what I teach. And I have my friends from other countries join my classes and talk about certain things. So if you're interested, just feel free to let me know and we can start that conversation.
That's very nice of you. I also found your you on the University of Missouri website, so I just saved the link to that because I just moved to Berlin, and the school system is very different to the one in the Saarland, and I'm at a very interesting school right now that has a lot of issues with the students itself, but also having enough teachers, having enough resources and everything. So yeah, if you're ever looking to come to Berlin, maybe we can arrange that too.
Well, it's on my list. My wife and I, that's our hobby. We travel. And
Okay.
so
I shoot you an email and then you can just let me know if you have something else in the area.
it'd be fantastic. Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, look like you have to do a really long German tour. Traveling all through Germany.
Yeah.
The Saarland to Berlin is almost the longest distance you can do.
Yes, I know that. And so
yeah, but for Americans, that's just like hopping, basically.
Yeah.
Every time I talk to an American, I was like, yeah, well, we have to do a really long trip. I have to go to Berlin. And they're like, yeah, well, that's what I do to get to dinner with my parents or something.
Yeah,
why are you complaining about?
The United States, where we're used to long trips because especially in the Midwest, you're a long ways from city to city anywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, Berlin's on my list. That would be something I'd be interested in talking about.
Okay, do we have any more questions or comments or other schools that are offering themselves up for a visit? No? Okay, so I think that's it for today. And we will continue our little series on health next week, where we talk about the transformation of American drug problems. And that's going to be on Tuesday, not on Monday. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you. Bye.
Good meeting, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.